The way people find craft beer has changed a lot the past 5 years. That's why we created Brewery DB, to help craft enthusiasts filter their search as they plan their next adventure. And to help breweries connect with these adventurers, we created MarketMyBrewery. MarketMyBrewery gives you full control over how people discover and see your products. You can market directly to the craft enthusiasts who are seeking great experiences without crowdsourced information or consumer ratings and reviews. We make it easy to update brand information, provide the key details people are searching for, and tell your brand story the way you want to tell it. Join MarketMyBrewery today for free and take control of your online presence.
Hey everybody, welcome to CBP Panel Fest, sponsored by Beer 30 by the Fifth Ingredient and MarketMyBrewery. I'm Kat Pearce, Commerce Operations Manager at ABS Commercial, and your moderator for today's panel, Brewery Equipment Forecasting, Part 2, Considerations for Growth. Picking up where Part 1, Budgeting Basics with G4 Kegs left off, this session delves into the crucial considerations for when to invest in additional equipment and resources as breweries grow. Our panelists will address key issues to support strategic decision-making to equip brewery owners with the knowledge to scale their operations effectively and sustainably. Before we get started, I'd like to invite each of our guests to take about 60 seconds to introduce themselves. We're joined by 2 industry partners and 2 brewery representatives. So in a quick minute each, can you all please tell us who you are, where you're from, and just for a quick icebreaker, if you were a beer, what beer would you be and why? Bryan, I'll go ahead and let you start out.
I got picked on first yesterday too, or the earlier panel, I should say. I'm Bryan Richards. I am with G4 Kegs. We are the nation's largest family and independently owned keg supplier. Our headquarters is in Portland, Oregon, where we have a warehouse. We also have one in Virginia Beach, Virginia. But I work remotely out of my home office in Charlotte, North Carolina. Now, if I were a beer, what would I be? So I had some chance to think about this one since I was asked this on a podcast last week. So I would say like an American strong ale, because I come across, people tell me I come across a little loud and aggressively at times.
I can understand that completely. Sean, why don't you go ahead?
All right. So everybody, I am Sean Hallet. I am the state sales manager for Raleigh Brewing Company as of 3 weeks ago. Previous to this, I was just the western half of the state sales rep. And then previous to this, I was a territory rep for Four Saints Brewing Company. So I've been on this side of the industry for about 3 years now. But previous to all this, I was a hospitality industry veteran, better parts of like 12 years hanging out on the other side of the bar. If I was a beer, I would be a porter, I think, mostly just because it's a very, very reliable, easily approachable, but also because it's open to adjuncts and kind of additives and that kind of things, open to change, open to growth. So,
excellent. Torin, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, hey everyone. My name is Torin. I'm one of the co-founders at Kegshoe. Kegshoe is a startup focused on helping breweries track their kegs. So we do keg tracking software to help breweries, reduce keg loss, increase their turnover rates, just overall build a more efficient draft operation. We've been doing this for about 10 years now. I'm up in Canada, in Vancouver, BC, but we've got customers all over the world, mostly in Canada and the US. But we're expanding internationally as well. In terms of my beers, I don't know. I think seeing as I'm on the West Coast here, I'll go for a West Coast Pale Ale. We just have to represent the West here.
For sure. All right, Chris, and you go ahead.
My name is Chris Murray. I'm the CFO for Raleigh Brewing Company. I started my career in finance in the private equity industry about 15, almost 20 years ago. But about 10 years ago, I moved to North Carolina and met a brewery owner and joined the industry. Brewed commercially for about 6 or 7 years, and then decided to move back into the finance side of things. So my favorite, or the beer that I would want to be, is actually my favorite. I love IPAs, every kind of IPA, any kind of IPA, just love them, got to have them all the time. So yeah.
Excellent. And I'll go ahead and introduce myself as well. Once again, I am Kat. I'm the Commerce Operations Manager for ABS Commercial. I have experience primarily before ABS Commercial in beer sales, doing essentially what Sean was doing, And about 2 years ago, I joined in on the homebrew side for ABS Commercial, and I moved up to be Commerce Operations Manager. So I handle small parts in addition to homebrew, and just manage the team for that as far as our e-commerce sites. So if I were a beer, it's also my favorite beer, but I would be a Flanders Red. Sharp but complex. Not everything is as it seems until you get to know the deeper character. Alrighty, well, I'm going to go ahead and get us started off with our first question. And this is open up to any of y'all, so feel free to jump in as you feel fit. For sales growth, there is the concept of growing deep versus wide. At which point in sales and distribution did you focus on expanding your market? Or should you focus on expanding your market?
We all just jump in at any point here. I guess for thoughts on that one, I think when you're starting out, if you're a new brewery, it's really important to focus on your hyper local market, your tap room, establishing your name and your brand. And once you have that and you have more stability, at least financially speaking, that's when you need to start considering kind of branching out and growing. It's kind of an MO in businesses. If you're not growing, you're shrinking. So you want to make sure that once your tap rooms are really solidified and you have kind of that brand recognition in that market, that you're starting to explore expanding your reach there.
And I'd be curious, with the experience at Raleigh Brewing. So what I've been seeing a lot amongst our clients is they may have been in distribution pretty wide, covering a larger geographic territory, whether that's multiple regions in their states or multiple states. Many of them are contracting back and taking a deeper focus on their particular region. So, for example, I'm in Charlotte, really honing in on Charlotte and trying to dive deeper into that region. And what I hear is a lot of that has to do with costs and shrinking margins, where the wider you get, the smaller the margins are on your product. A good example of that comes from the keg front. When you go very wide, you have one or two options on how you manage your fleet. One, you could buy more kegs because you're going to need more kegs than you would if you're just going deep within your market, because those kegs are out and they're spending more time out in the wild. And so you need more kegs. So that keg is earning you less revenue than it would before. Or you could opt for a paper fill model, which is, what a lot of breweries do when they're going on a very, very wide distribution model. But that comes with some extremely high costs. I helped a client out recently that, over 3 years, it was going to cost them $100,000 more to go with that particular model than, for example, leasing kegs. So it just shows you that, where that's just one facet of the cost that go into producing the product. But I'm curious what Raleigh Brewing is to say more about that.
Yeah. At least on the finance side, speaking there, Raleigh Brewing, we started out with kind of self-distribution, and we did go deep in a very kind of small market, the Triangle area. And then, over the past couple of years, when we signed on with distribution to be statewide, which Sean can talk a little bit more about, That was our opportunity to really start to see growth in sales beyond. You get to a point where you can only go so deep in a local market and you have to start looking elsewhere. So I can let Sean talk more kind of about the beyond the triangle.
So obviously taking care of the home markets is always going to be the number one priority. So making sure that we're handling the triangle. Previous to me working for Raleigh Brewing, I touched on that was with Four Saints Brewing Company. My first sales territory was the Triad, so getting out to Greensboro, Winston-Salem, and High Points. Obviously, Four Saints being where they were, that was really the home territory and that kind of thing for them. Coming out there and essentially building up those relationships that I previously had just with a new brewery. Raleigh Brewing Company not being as present and that kind of thing in those markets and be able to stretch out that way has really been easier partnering up with the distributor because a lot of those relationships are already in hand. So just breaking into those new markets is a very, very important thing once you hit those ceilings as a brewery to be able to, reach in. So.
What would you say that those ceilings specifically look like when new breweries are looking to focus on distributing their beer outside their local area? What are some of the key points in which you think it's time to start moving wide versus deep?
Honestly, it really just comes from a production standpoint. Like if you are saturating your home market and that kind of thing and even when it comes to your tap room, so your tap rooms and your customer base, if you're finding that you're having more beer than you know what to deal with, then that's an example of like it's somewhere you want to start like looking outside your circle a little bit. Like depending on obviously the size of systems and that kind of thing, it'll really just depend on how. Also, if you have the capabilities like any kind of like fleet stuff and that kind of thing too, it would definitely be like an investment point and that kind of thing if you're looking to get into there. The other thing about it is also just analyzing like how that beer market is moving too, just as an idea. But like that's really like a ceiling that I would see first. It's just like, oh, I have all this beer. What do I do with it?
For sure. And that's actually a perfect move into our next question, which is from a production standpoint, what are some red and green flags to look for before pursuing a distribution partner?
I would say probably one of the key things is both on the production and the money side is, if you're going to move into distribution, you have to start thinking about the staffing levels that you have, kind of expanding that and making sure that your finances are in order to really handle and take care of that. You want to definitely have more marketing that goes on behind the scenes in terms of supporting your brand outside your local area. So those are really important things to be looking at. Equipment investment, things of that nature, getting more kegs to be able to service that. It's one thing when all you're worried about is moving beer, through your tap room. But immediately after that, so the biggest green flag for me and the seat that I sit in is, financially speaking, can we cover the cost of doing this? What's going to be the recap time in terms of the investment costs, not just beyond the equipment, but also the human capital. Because when you're distributing, you need boots on the ground. Whether you have a distributor, you can definitely leverage their team, but you also need your own people who understand your beer, understand your product, and can really help assist a distribution team if you go with a distributor.
Having a scalability plan has always been like a huge thing. So as Chris was saying, it's really just having the finances and having a plan to make sure you're able to grow with everything. And just to piggyback off Chris was saying about having a sales team to back up your distributor reps. A lot of really, really great communication is happening. Because I'm able to, work with the distributor reps, it also allows me to have a deeper, better conversation with my accounts, so we can actually make some like sustainable growth instead of having it be a turn and burn mindset, like trying to hit 50 accounts and that kind of thing over the course of a week just to get as many sales as possible. So it allows for just better communication.
And from the supplier point of view, it's really before you sign your new agreement, your distributor, start talking to the various suppliers that you're going to need for that growth, whether it's an equipment point of view, whether it's ingredients, whether it's bottles, cans, kegs. Start getting pricing, start getting quotes. As soon as you sign that agreement, place those orders. I talked to a lot of clients that are leading up to distribution, and maybe it's 2 months out. That's great. I have no problem having those conversations. I welcome them because I know that when it's signed, we're ready to go. We're ready to pull the plug on your order, ready to get the ball rolling. What I fear is I had this happen just this week. A client waited until weeks after they signed their agreement. They waited till they had their beer in the fermenter, decide, crap, I need kegs to get to my distributor for this new contract. And now they're in a panic mode because they need to be screen printed, and there's a lead time with that. So start bringing in your suppliers earlier. And I'd even love to hear, Torin, on your angle, what would, because Kegshoe helps with that. What are some things that you think about on the distribution side when a client's getting to go that way?
Yeah, we see a lot of that transition where breweries kind of start with us in the self-distro stage, and then as they grow and they get ready for signing on distributors, and obviously that can vary a lot depending on the brewery and the geography and their whole system. But we see like tracking a lot of different metrics that can really kind of help guide those decisions and even help guide some of those negotiations with your distributor. Like if you're kind of able to come in and say like, what your regular turnover rates are, your like clean, dirty kegs and like your utilization rates, just general how your keg fleet is sort of moving, that can really provide a lot of guidance into those negotiations, and also track the success beyond after you sign that agreement. If you're kind of managing that and knowing where those kegs are going afterwards, ideally you're able to track that success.
Torin, when is the appropriate time to start investing in a keg tracking system, specifically so they can have that information before moving into a distributor partnership?
Everyone. I'm not biased at all. No, I mean, we like our customer base is anywhere. We've got breweries with 50 or 100 kegs all the way up to tens of thousands of kegs. Every brewery, like I said, every brewery is different. I think there's certainly a lot of value in starting early, because the later you get, the more kegs you have, the bigger project it is to implement this new system. And if you kind of have these systems in place, you get to track that your own growth, and it can really help you make those informed decisions as you sort of start moving into these next stages of your brewery journey, right? If you're looking into the distribution, you can have all that data to sort of back up and say like, okay, this is a good decision. Like we have the data to back it up. So I would say, yeah, I mean, we get breweries coming to us at all stages. Like we have breweries with, 5,000-10,000 kegs who haven't tracked the keg ever. You can do that, but there's a lot of value to be had by starting early.
So as far as distributors go, and I'm curious to know what all of you think about this, how do I choose the right distributor for my business? Don't everybody start at once. Sean, maybe talk to me about the things that you like about our distributor partner that help make your job easier. Let's start out with that.
I enjoy our distributor. I've had the pleasure of working with Johnson Brothers Mutual on 2 different fronts. So working with them as a buyer and also working with them as a supplier at this point. There was a lot of really, really great communication that happens. And also just like their scope. We have statewide distribution with them. So we're working in the mountains, over in Charlotte, and all the way to the coast, and also in our home territory in the Triad, just all over the place. What I like most about them is really just the level of communication. And because they've been around for a very, very long time. They have, a lot of really, really great connections with a lot of the different chains that we've been working heavily with a lot of the chain managers in there. And it's just, they have an emphasis on like just a really, really great amount of quality in their entire portfolio, not even just their beer, but also the wine side of things as well. So I like it. I enjoy working with them. And then even as a buyer, like every single one of my JBM reps were amazing. They were always on top of things, always super professional.
So as a buyer in the past, what are some of the red flags from distributors that you think breweries should be looking out for?
Lack of communication is a huge one. There were a handful of distributors that I just got bad vibes from, mostly just because I personally never asked for everyday communication or even week to week communication. But if I'm reaching out and then all of a sudden 72 hours later, I'm not hearing back from you, that's really a big thing, because it just makes me feel like you don't want my business. With our distributing partner, I've never felt that way from a buyer standpoint, or even the questions that I'm asking currently as a new sales manager. With any of the people that I'm working with right now.
Sure. Does anybody else have any thoughts on how to choose the right distributor for your business?
I'll throw in we obviously work at a very surface level in lots of different markets. And so, I think the one reality is sometimes you don't have a lot of choice. I know
right.
In Canada, especially too, there's pretty limited, but I think that if there's a willingness from the distributor, I honestly piggyback what Sean was saying, the communication is kind of huge. Obviously access to some of the metrics and their own tracking systems, that's a huge gap that we see from our side, is that most distributors don't. We've had a few who are willing to kind of adopt some keg tracking practices, but not a lot don't. Not a lot do, sorry. But there are definitely varying levels of, the amounts of data that they can share with breweries. So the more data you can get, the better, I think, would be the only thing that we see.
Yeah, I think I can agree with what Sean said about Mutual. We've been very lucky to have a distribution partner where communication is upfront. It's been really paramount and super helpful for spitballing how we want to do different things and strategizing. Something that I would probably be looking for and could be a red flag, if we were trying to look at distribution partners in other markets, would essentially be their current portfolio. And what that mix looks like, how many brands they have, how many brands they're trying to push. If it's your forced foray into distribution, how many brands do they already have that are in your local market right now, and how much competition are you going to see there? So that would probably be one of the first things that I would want to look at.
Sure. Bryan, I don't know if we touched on this, and forgive me if I'm wrong, but what kind of considerations should breweries be making when considering the amount of kegs that they need, from going self-distribution to working with a distributor partner?
There's two factors on helping determine how many kegs you need. Is one, you want to look at what that new production goal is. So if you're signing on a distributor, you're going to be producing more liquid. How much more liquid are you producing? And then you want to factor in turn time, right? Your kegs are going to be turning over a lot less when they are in distribution, right? And that depends on, are you just distributing in your own backyard? Are you distributing across state? Then the further out you go, you figure out the more time you need, the more time it'll take for that keg to get back. So the more kegs you're going to need. In addition, you also want to consider keg size. And some of this is market driven, but a lot of breweries, when they're brand new and they're starting out, their distributor partners are leaning towards sixtels. Their counts aren't necessarily willing to take a risk on an entire half barrel of a product that may not move on their tap lines. So a lot of times they'll start with sixtels, but then as the brand is established, as the product is starting to sell, and then we start to see a lot of our clients switching over from sixtels into halves. Now, if you were been around a couple of years, you have some very strong flagships, and maybe it look different for you. It may say, yeah, that this beer is already, killing it in my local market, and I know that I'm going to the market over, and we know it's going to do the same there. So your distributors may be saying, no, we want halves at this point. We already know that this is a known beer. It has a successful sales pattern. So those are the main factors to look at.
Thanks. One of the things that you mentioned was actually turnaround time. So I think we are all very familiar with the struggle that is getting your kegs back. What do you guys recommend for having a good turnaround time for getting your kegs back?
I work with a partner like Kegshoe.
Great answer.
It's interesting because we do partner with Kegshoe, and we do refer clients over to Kegshoe, part because we love their product, but another main reason why is I've been into multiple accounts of mine, and unsolicited Kegshoe is recommended. Kegshoe is praised by that account for really helping them get kegs back, helping them shrink their keg loss. And Torin can go into more how he does that. But other ways is consider, if you're don't have a deposit on your kegs, use one. Consider upping it. If you're only at $50 on your keg deposit, that's not enough to pay to cover your replacement keg. If your market could handle it, maybe up that to 100, or maybe peg it to the keg size on what the replacement cost is. Kegshoe and I share a mutual client, and this particular client, she has in her agreement with the distributor that if a keg is lost, they are paying the full value to replace that keg.
Wow.
Yeah. So, deposits are one way, but, also looking at what your agreement says. And if you need to make changes to your agreement with your distributor, to ensure you're getting your kegs back and to quite honestly make it a little more painful for them, that's one way to do it.
We had an old customer a long time ago, who I won't name. They were up in Canada, but they ordered, I think, about 100 or 200 used kegs from a supplier. And when they arrived at their brewery, they realized about half of them were actually their own kegs, had all their branding and everything on them.
Wow.
And yeah, it was a perfect highlight of, it's what we always say is that you can't manage what you don't track, right?
Right.
So ignorance can sometimes be very blissful until they show up at your doorstep. Having that data, just kind of reiterating what I was saying before, but knowing what your turnaround times are, can really help sort of navigate that. Okay, if you're going into a distributor now, like you can have a baseline, right? Like whether that's higher or lower afterwards, but that having that data is paramount to knowing exactly what sort of capital investment you want to make. If you can, knowing if you can service your accounts with 1,500 kegs versus 2,000 kegs, that's a big difference.
For sure. And Sean, do you have anything to add to the question of how do you get the dang kegs back?
I mean, from a sales side, especially when I was working for self-distributing brewing company, it was always, okay, so you ordered this. We're going to have this delivered on this day. Do you have any empties? Just flat out asking the question. And working with the distributor reps and that kind of thing too, Same thing. If an order comes to me and I got to send it out there, ask them, do they have any empties? Communicate with the distributor rep. By the way, they have these empties. So that note's going to be on the delivery driver. Delivery driver's already going to be on the lookout for all the kegs. So that's like, boots on the ground way and that kind of thing. Personally, for me to be able to get empty kegs back, because you can't make beer without kegs.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, when I was working for a really small brewery in Cary, North Carolina, I was not only the sales rep, but I was also the delivery driver, and all of the many hats that I wore for that company, but specifically the delivery driver as well. And, one of the things that I took when I moved from that company into a company that we did have a dedicated delivery driver instead of me having to do everything, was specifically training in the repetition of, doing the same thing every time you walk into an account. Because if you don't have that repetition to, specifically ask that, do you have any kegs? And then they keep responding with no. Okay, maybe this time I'm just not going to ask. I'm going to turn around and I'm going to look for them. Especially if you have a keg tracking system that tells you that it's there. You can't always trust the individuals.
And that's kind of, I kind of got lost on the other point, but that's what we typically have our breweries are doing is you can start to see, all right, what's an average turnaround time even for a specific location, and that can help prioritize, all right, like how often should we be calling them or visiting them, both from the sales side and picking up kegs. We also have like what we call our pickup report, which is to really help you track down your delinquent kegs. So as soon as a keg's been at a location for longer than a month or 2 months or beyond, it's like, here's your list of kegs that really should be back at the brewery by now. So there's a lot of ways that you can do it. Ideally, you're able to kind of take that data and build a proactive plan. Because yes, for the most part, we see exactly what you're saying, Kat, is like, I've seen breweries just take their QuickBooks, AR list and just start making phone calls. And there's definitely a lot of better ways to spend a salesperson's time.
Oh, for sure. I unfortunately had a lot of my time stolen that way. All right. At what benchmarks should a brewery consider expanding their equipment purchasing, whether it be larger equipment from ABS, like stainless steel, more kegs, a canning line, whatever? At which benchmark should we consider doing that?
From a keg perspective, it's really whenever you start to see your production grow, right? And that happens in many ways. One, say you are utilizing 50% of your system capacity in your firm farm capacity. Now you're going to be going up to 75%. Well, when you're doing that, you need to make sure, where is that extra liquid going? Is it going to cans? Is it going to bottles? Is it going into kegs? And once you determine where that liquid's going, you need to make that purchase of making sure you have whatever packaging it is on hand and ready. It's when you order that new fermenter, start talking to your suppliers, your keg suppliers, for example. When that fermenter ships, those kegs need to be ordered and need to be getting ready to be shipped as well. And if you're growing into a larger system, I'd say the rule of thumb is, when that larger system ships, because a lot goes into that larger system shipping. It has to arrive, it has to be installed and tested. So you want to be placing your order when it ships. So when you're ready for that first brew, you need those kegs there. Whenever you are starting to produce more liquid, the kegs, the cans, the bottles need to be in place instead of waiting until they're in the fermenter. That's too late, unfortunately. And that I have weekly conversations, if not daily, with brewers in a panic because they forgot their kegs. And the beer needs to come out of the fermenter tomorrow, and they need me to have kegs delivered tomorrow. And they're calling me at 4:30 on a Friday. Well, we ship LTL. It's really hard to get a carrier to show up on demand and let alone deliver on a Saturday. So it's placing those orders before you're making that additional liquid.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously we're just to build on what Bryan was saying on the keg side is being able to track your inventory distribution over time. Ideally you should be able to predict that, and so being able to give the guys at G4 that lead time, because that your distribution levels of like how many kegs you guys have on hand, how many are out in the field, and that those turnovers are staying regular. Like, you should be able to predict that, and so that you can kind of not have to call Bryan on a Friday.
I mean, I need a full truckload of kegs delivered tomorrow morning. It's like for Saturday by 9 a.m. It's 4:30 on a Friday. And I mean, my hands are tied. I can't even get a truck to show up. I mean, we're willing to work overtime to get them ready, but there's only so much we can control within our realm of control. It's the outside of our realm of control where the hiccup or the delays happen.
Chris, do you have anything to say about specifically like canning lines or even just brewery equipment, maybe considering investing in a pilot system or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, we've at Raleigh Brewing, we have a 3-barrel pilot system. We do have our own canning line, and really kind of what we focused on in terms of our growth and how we approach it. I mean, it's kind of step one is testing what's going to work, in terms of like that pilot system. Having that's really helpful, so we're not brewing 20-barrel batches all the time to see what's going to work. And really, when we're testing new beers that we want to put out into the market, whether it's new seasonals or something that we're going to do year round, is really building like an R&D box and saying, okay, to the head brewer, we need these metrics. We have to be able to sell this beer at this price point, and we need X amount of margin to make this work. And that's when they start designing those recipes, which is a nice way from the get-go that we know it's going to end up working if the market likes it. And then from there, when we want to lean into something, it's like, okay, what equipment do we need? We can look at our sales mix and say, okay, we know that 40-50% of this beer is going to go into kegs. We need to do that. We want to focus on brewing X number of barrels. We're going to need this amount of fermenters to come online. What do we need that's new? So it's all those things is kind of how we approach what we're going to invest in and when. But it all goes back to really starting with like the recipe and that targeted approach. And then how we're going to roll it out in terms of which markets we want to attack with that particular brand and beer. So, at Raleigh Brewing, we're in a really good spot in that we can do everything from, taproom testing all the way through, canning, whether it be 12 ounce or 19.2s, anything like that. And then having kind of the keg support there as well too. But that's how we view kind of what we're going to do and how we're going to test it. And then how we grow into different markets.
Just coming from a keg tracking type of system, are there any specific metrics or data points that brewers should focus on before purchasing equipment that would come from a keg tracking system?
Yeah, and again, this will be always very unique to each brewery. Like we like to look at obviously turnaround times and using that as a great calculation in terms of like when to sort of invest more. Turnaround times, obviously utilization rates, is there effective ratios of your on-hand kegs versus delivered kegs, clean kegs versus dirty kegs in your brewery, that sort of thing, to really sort of inform those decisions. That can be, in terms of that sort of expansion point, that's going to be very different for every brewery and depending on your market. But ideally you have those trends coming over time and that you can kind of start optimizing those, and that should really be able to sort of inform those decisions as you kind of continue to grow.
For sure. So I think we can all agree that, especially for production, but even taproom, space is always a shrinking problem. Or more specifically, the problem grows, but the space shrinks. What key considerations, especially after we've purchased all of this equipment, should a brewery review before expanding to a second location, both taproom versus second production facility?
So I think there's a lot to think about in that. If it comes to just an additional tap room, it's the expenses that you're going to be taking on to support it, the renovation costs, things of that nature, and that's assuming that it's just a place to sell beer, and it's not going to be an additional production facility. If you're going to move and really be looking at a new production facility, it's what's that long-term plan to start utilizing that capacity? Because as soon as you open up that facility and start brewing beer there, it's unlikely that you're going to instantly match its production capacity. So you want to make sure that as you're bringing things online, that you're doing it in such a way that's very streamlined, that you know that, okay, if you open up the production facility, it's going to help you on the front of ease the pinch points, maybe up front in terms of the cyclicality of your market cycle. Here in Raleigh, we have peak seasons and we have slow seasons. So, it would be nice to say that if you were going to sell 8,000 barrels a year, that you were going to have like this nice flat line of like being able to produce that much all the time. But in reality, it's going like this. So your total peak is to really maximize every dollar. Let's say if you're a brewery and you're only going to be selling 5,000 barrels a year or making 5,000 barrels a year, your actual production might actually need to be, if you were able to keep those tanks full all the time and just kegging it off constantly, you might need to be able to produce, 7,500 barrels to make that work. So knowing your cyclicality is going to be really important in terms of making that decision and then targeting it along with, again, that long-term strategic plan. Why do you want that second facility? What territories are you going to bring online? And really, how much do you think in terms of sales you're going to get out of it?
Yeah, and obviously with the second location, your logistics get exponentially more complex as well. So depending on what that distribution setup is, you're going to want to have that really dialed in terms of of that whole how that distribution system is going to work, whether you're self-distro or using a distributor. But adding that other location, it can be a significant layer of complexity if you don't have those systems dialed in.
Anything else from Sean or Bryan? All righty. My last question is more of a wrap-up question, but can each one of you offer one actionable insight or critical consideration that brewery owners should prioritize immediately when deciding on expanding their operations, be it investing in new equipment, selecting a distributor, or opening additional tap rooms?
Sure, I'll start. Just start talking to your vendors as soon as you are doing these plans. Even if it's a business plan, pull your vendors in now to learn their pricing, so you're not shocked when you place an order or when you sign that distributed agreement and you're like, holy cow, didn't realize tanks will cost this much or kegs will cost this much, right? Start talking to vendors when you're building your planning. Don't guess. And then don't wait until the last minute to order.
Yeah,
for sure.
I'm with Bryan on that one. It makes complete sense there as you're kind of building that strategy for your next move and what to do. I mean, the best thing about kind of the craft beer industry is, it's small businesses, you can be nimble, but always having that information on hand is super important. And if you're waiting until the last minute to try to grab that info, you're always going to be behind the ball. You're going to be stuck kind of missing the next wave or ride or opportunity that you could have had. And the faster that you can turn tanks, the faster you can turn kegs, the more money you're going to be making.
My key message of my broken record would be more data. Whether that is using a keg tracking system, but really anything, right? Like, and honestly, similar to what the other guys are saying is take the guesswork out of it, because we're human and we make errors, and so the more data that you can have to support your decisions, the better.
Just communicate early, communicate often.
Yep. To kind of like play along with what Sean was saying, for me, the biggest thing that I would say is utilize the networks that you have. And it's not just, the networks of your vendor partner relationships. It's also utilizing the folks right in your backyard. If you are able to make collaborative efforts to be able to speak one-on-one with, even though the folks around you are your competitors, they can also be your friends. Be sure to chat with people in your backyard about like, what is it that you would suggest in this situation? How have you approached this in the past? What is it that we have in common versus in difference? I think that even utilizing, obviously, like craft beer professionals or Pink Boots Society, there are many ways in which you can get the information you need, even if it's just for a little quick piece of advice. Does anybody else have anything else that they want to say in close?
Well, to piggyback on what you just said, Kat, I recommend that to brewers all the time. When they're looking at, okay, what size do I need for my tap room? What size kegs versus in distribution? And, I give them my rule of thumb, halves are always better in the tap room. 6 tools, are usually preferred when you're starting out in the market when you're distributing. But talk to your local brewers to see what was like when they got started, see what they're doing now, see what they're hearing the market saying. Just don't take my word for it. Call the brewery across the street or down the road.
For sure. Anybody, anything else?
That's all I got.
All righty. Well, once again, thank you guys for joining us for part 2, considerations for growth for brewery equipment forecasting. Once again, I'm Kat, and that's Bryan, Sean, Torin, and Chris. And we'll get up with you guys later. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to give us a shout.
Cheers.